So I think we are all set. Good morning, everyone. The Department of English, College of Vocational Studies welcomes you all to today's online speaker session, American Literature, Context and Contours. I welcome everyone, our senior teachers, our colleagues, students from different colleges, and obviously our esteemed speaker today, Professor Prem Kumari Srivastava, ma'am. We welcome you, ma'am. You took out time from your busy schedule. We are grateful to you. Thank you. Uh, well, ma'am needs no introduction, but as any program would require some formal decorum, so I would like to introduce ma'am to you. So Professor Prem Kumari Srivastava is a professor at the Department of English, Maharaja Agrasen College, and she has been teaching for around 3 decades now. She has earned her PhD in American culture and literature from IIT Delhi, and her publications, if you talk about articles in journals and magazines, then they count more than 100. And she has graced various academic and administrative positions. Some of them include being the program coordinator for BA Honors for Cluster Innovation Center. She has convened various workshops and conferences and committees, and she has authored and edited more than 80 books so far. Her publications are more than 80, and she has authored and co-edited around 8 books. I would like to mention some of them. They are Cultures of the India and Beyond, 2014, Standing by the Wayside, 2014, Restoring the Indigenous and the Popular Imaginary, Volume 3, 2017, Spiritual Ecology and Sustainability, Practice and Confluence, 2017. She had co-edited this. And the recent one that she has co-edited with one of our colleagues, Nidhi Madan, that is Revisiting American Literature, which has come out in 2018. So I think we have just the right person here with us to, the topic that we have, American literature, context and contours. So she's the best person we can have here to take us along the trajectory of the contours of American literature, how the history, the political timeline, the major events, the culture, and the values that America, the concept of America has shaped itself to be, and the values that it stands for, and the hiccups as well that it had to face. So we welcome you, ma'am. I hand over the platform to you.
Thanks, Swati. Thank you so much for this very generous introduction. I haven't authored 80 books. So yes, yes, maybe uh, around 10 of them. Yes. So a very warm good morning to all of you. It is no longer warm. It is turning a little cold nowadays. But a warm good morning to all of you, and it gives me great pleasure to be talking to all of you about an area, a country, a geographical conclave that has and that will always affect the world in several ways, and this is America. And I'm extremely grateful to Professor Inderjeet Dagar, the principal of CVS, Dr. Sanjeev Kakkar, teacher in charge. Is that true? Swati, Sanjeev is the teacher in charge? Yes. Department of English, CVS. Several great friends that I have at CVS, and one of them, I just, Geeta has joined. Anu is also here. Of course, I know Gauri and Nidhi is a close young friend. Swati herself. And several others. I need to, of course I am today in Mayur Vihar, but I need to just say that CVS is extremely close to my heart because I used to stay very close to CVS. I used to stay in Swaminagar. I think most of you would know Panchil and Swaminagar. I used to stay in Swaminagar in those early years, 19 late 1980s and early 1990s. And I must have visited CVS several times. So CVS is really close to my heart. And of course, I thank Swati for inviting me over to deliver this talk. Now, the seven, eight important contexts and contours that I'm going to talk about are not just different historical, political, sociological, intellectual, and literary pages of the book that is America, but they make for independent treatises and standalone semester courses. So the task ahead is extremely difficult. I need to really just touch upon these contexts to give you a very very broad overview. So the frame is a large frame, and it is going to be dotted with these seven eight, I think, very very important contexts which are going to give you an idea of. And here I understand, this is the brief that Swati gave me, that several students have joined. So we have this extremely vibrant and I think very rich paper in American literature, which of course covers almost not just 500 years, and this is what we know. So I'm going to talk about two histories. One history is the history of American literature, and going to talk about, when I say history, I mean the literary, sociological, cultural, political, and intellectual, all kinds of histories. So the history that I learned, I grew up with, studied in pages and I was taught in classrooms. And today I am going to discuss and talk about a history that I teach, and it's a revisitation. It's a revisitation, and I'm not going to get into corridors and areas which I know will take us away from the topic under consideration and under discussion. These why we are relooking at America is because of several lenses that we wear today, the post-colonial lens and so on and so forth. I'm not going to really get into that. What I'm telling you is that it is so we are going to look at two histories, and of course what is very important is the new history, and it is a relooked, reconsidered history of America. Right. In talking about America, we're looking at, as I said, historical and literary contexts which are not just 500 years or 5 decades old, but we are looking at contexts which are probably 4,000 years or 20,000 years, BC. So I'm going to talk about that old. So I'm also going to talk about the native context, which is the invisibilized context, right? And I'm going to just touch upon this context, right? Because this context is very important. And globally, and when we look at literatures all over the world, including India, the Adivasi context, the tribal context, when it comes to Australia, the Aboriginal context, when you look at Canada, the First Nations context, and when you look at America, the Native American context. So the Native context is also a very, very important context. So let me just kind of quickly begin. As I said, I'm going to maybe take you through around 7 8 parts. Let's look at the time, and then we will see how we progress. But I'm definitely going to talk to you about 7 8 very important contexts. And the first, as I said, is a history that was the native context, 40,000 to 20,000 years BC. Now, North America, as we see, was occupied by thousands of years, occupied for thousands of years by around 10 to 12 million natives north of Rio Grande. Their literature was oral in nature. They were writing epic narratives, creation myths, stories, poems, and songs. They use stories to teach moral lessons and convey practical information about the natural world. They had deep respect for nature and animals. They practiced a cyclical worldview and used figurative language and parallelism. Now, of course, we do not know the writers of, those years, but what we know is from the writings of the 20th century, native writers like Scott Momaday, Leslie Marmon Silko, and you're reading a story by Silko, Sherman Alexie. Some of the earlier students, who are now in MA have read Sherman Alexie. Jeanette Armstrong, she's the first woman poet who now lives in Canada. I happened to interview her. I happened to meet her. I went to her reservation in Penticton, Kelowna, near Vancouver, and had a long session with her. I published her, also in one of the international journals, and Joy Harjo. And students, by now, I don't know how many of you have already reached reading or you're being taught Joy Harjo. I'm going to give you a glimpse of Joy Harjo today. But Joy Harjo, she happens to be the 23rd Poet Laureate of America today. She's been the Poet Laureate since 2019. She is the one who read at the presidential, ceremony, of the present president of America. So Joy Harjo, who comes from the Muskogee tribe, and several other literary characters that we are familiar of, we are familiar with. Right. Pocahontas, you might have heard of this very important character, Chingachgook, who figures in, in Finnemer Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales, Queequeg, he figured in a native, he figured in Moby Dick, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, the figure of trickster, Lone Ranger, Buffalo Bill, Buffalo Bill, the cowboy cult and the Buffalo Bill, very common, might have heard of these, terms, you might have heard of these names. The Indian Princess Tiger Lily from Barry's Peter Pan, you might have heard, you all might have in your, young days on your childhood read about stories of Peter Pan and so on and so forth. So we are familiar with some of these characters, and I've just named just a few, right, for you to just, get a idea of what I am talking about. As I said, every little context that I talk to you about is actually, as I said, one semester long course, right? But it's important for you to understand, and the course that you have right now gives you a glimpse of all of this. So it's very important for me also, and I think it's going to help you to at least get some idea of these, contexts, right? Now, in 1616, some English fishermen brought the European disease bacilli, which annihilated around 25,000 natives in New England. And in 1630 came smallpox, killing thousands of natives. The rest, as I said, died with their lands usurped, taken, and a very fine example of their land being taken is, and some of you might have read this or at least heard about this in your school, or otherwise your teachers might have just talked about this, is Chief Seathel's letter to President Franklin Roosevelt, A Simple Philosophy. Right. So how these natives were pushed in reservations, they were given to alcoholism, drug abuse. Several thousands died or led a life of ruin and waste. And today, and I'm going to come, let me not take away everything from today's session. So I'm going to talk about something interesting in the conclusion, right? I'm going to come back full circle there, right? But, today, of course, there's a whole lot of revival, and we are looking at things that were once forgotten, right? I come to the second most important context with which, we grew up. We thought that America was discovered, and that is what we have heard and read. Christopher Columbus reached the East Bahamas around 1492 and seemed to have discovered this new land in But the context that I and this is the context that we know of. It's a and I have called it, I have named it a history. The second context is a history created. It is the American dream created through the Puritan context of the New Englanders. Right. It is the context of the European settlers and setting up of the Puritan England. Right. So in 17th century, a tide of immigration, one of the greatest folk wanderings, swept through Europe. Early immigrants came as early as 15th, 16th century. William Penn, the poet, recounts the experience, and this movement was impelled by powerful and diverse motivations. Built, of course, it was also a result of a whole lot of disillusionment with the Church of England, and these Puritans wanted to build an utopia of sorts, a kind of city upon a hill, and a new Jerusalem, right? In this new land. So it was, as I said, impelled by powerful and diverse motivations built, and this is how they built this, and that's how what they called a nation out of wilderness. Now we all know that one context, one set of people, one whole lot of people were totally ignored, right? The America was already the land of the natives. That is why students and friends who are here and listeners, I spoke about the history that was, that was a history that was kind of eroded and erased, right? Now, of course, we need to kind of discuss this because this happened to be the primary hegemonic ideology that ruled America for decades and for centuries. Right. So, America is therefore a product of, and this I'm talking about the early America of the 17th century and the 18th century, was a product of two principal forces: the immigration of the Europeans with their varied ideas, customs, and character, and impact of, and I'm going to remove a word from here, impact of the new land, no, impact of this land, right? Which is this kind of and this land which modified them, their distinctly diverse European cultural traits to suit their own. So they, of course, America, and if you read Crevaker, the American farmer, letters to the American farmer, he talks of this distinct American character. He talks of, America being this hugely democratic state, and it's later on that he will talk of the uncomfortable truths of America. And I'm going to come to that context a little later, right? And some of you are, of course, absolutely familiar with this context. We talk of the white America, and then we talk of the Black America, and we talk of the brown America. Right. So I'm going to come to that just a little later. But so as I said, there were Englishmen, there were Dutch, there were Germans, there were Scots, Irish, Swedes. All of them brought their distinct cultural traits, and supposedly there was this amalgamation into a new kind of a character, and which was exceptional in many ways. And this was the narrative from Crevaker and many others, that this narrative was kind of built. And as I said, there was the emergence of Puritanism as a hegemonic American ideology. And they and the impulse was the same impulse of kind of, you know Christianizing. It was a kind of a mission to, you know treat the savages, to civilize the savages. It was in many ways a kind of a civilizing mission. We have William Bradford, who wrote of Plymouth Plantation. We have the Puritan theologian Cotton Mather, who absolutely approved the genocide of the natives. And the attempt was to transplant themselves and their culture into a new world. You see, there's a whole lot of thrust on newness, new. And this is so, and this continues, if you read 20th century literature, there is this constant reference to dream of the new. America is a land of immense possibilities, the new mutants, and so on and so forth. So this, the American dream in itself was, something, it was a new dream. It was a dream of a certain kind of an ideal, a set of ideals in which the American democracy thrived, portraying American society as characterized by principles of equal opportunity and self-determination. And if you look at, this, the American dream is that kind of a frame. It's a kind of a constant. What happened to the American dream? Has there been a dissolution of the American dream? Did it thrive? How much does it live today? With the American dream is probably the discourse today. All of it, can be discussed and debated. But the fact of the case is that Benjamin Franklin to Mark Twain, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Willa Cather, the Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, Dreiser's An American Tragedy, Morrison's Songs of Solomon, and I can just continue to name texts and texts and texts where there's this whole reference. And of course, Langston Hughes, that's one author that this, at least this batch, is reading, an extremely important black writer of the Harlem Renaissance. His very, very famous poem is called the American Dream. So you see, this was a context which continued to exist in kind of America. Right. The next important uh, period is the expansion of this colonial, of the colonies, of this colonial period, of the New Englanders, how they established colonies. So let me just share something with you, a kind of a few maps and a presentation, right? Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Yeah, you can see this. All right, all right, all right. Yeah. So here you are, right? So this is, how the history was created, that this is the world map, and that from Europe, one of the greatest, as I said, folk wanderings, tides of immigration, from Europe, you can see, Spain, and they all reached, the east coast of America, across the most tumultuous North Atlantic Ocean, right? And these are some of the colonies that they set up in Massachusetts Bay, Boston, Plymouth Plantation, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maryland, Virginia. This particular map is also very important because you see that all around and through the east coast they all settled. And it is, as you come down towards south, you have Carolina, you have Georgia, Charlestown. Now all these places are important. You can also see certain names like the Chesapeake, and the several tribes who were pushed inside, and today several of them reside. The Cherokees, most of them reside in Oklahoma, which is in around the Central America. Right. Yeah, let me, okay, yes. So as you see, the next very important, can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
okay, okay,
Yes, ma'am.
wonderful. So the next very important context is the context of revolution, or the winning of independence. July 4th, 1776, Declaration of Independence is a very important document, and a document which is kind of used and is kind of, invoked again and again and again when it comes to, American literature, American, culture, and American history. Uh, I'll just read out, some bit from this Declaration of Independence because I think it's very important. We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, with this extremely lofty democratic declaration of independence, the American Constitution, American government was formed with George Washington as the first president, John Adams as the second president, and all these decisions were taken. So, some of the these terms are very important. At the Boston Tea Party, Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin are two very, very important makers of the American Constitution. Alongside the Puritan context, student, there was another simmering context, that was the Quaker context, which is central to the American thought. Please don't mind. I want to in this today's talk give you at least quite a bit, quite, I want to really touch upon, all the context. So I might just go a little fast. Please button and tell me if you have, or ask a question, or just, if you have a comment. Right. So the Quaker context, as I said, is very important. In 1680s, a sect of Christians inspired by Jen Fox turned away from the established church, the Catholic and the Anglican Puritans, in search of a new road to God. And for the Quakers, they believed in that the God resides within you, and you don't need to really step out into churches and all that. So there was this conflict between the Puritan and the Quaker context. So on the this is an aside, but a very important aside. But along this, as I said, the expansionist impulse was on, westward expansion, there was movement inside. There was the California gold rush, and students, some of you might have seen movies, the Clint Eastwood films. If you've seen, you know the gold rush, the cowboy cult, the rucksack, men on horseback, moving into wilderness, and all into deep west, moving towards west. The westward expansionist movement is a movement about, again, possibilities, again searching for, greater, looking for greener pastures, again, the spirit of conquering and conquer. So the gold rush is also called the frontier movement. It's also called, so literature revealed, and I hear it is Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, it revealed this new land. And again, I'm going to now not use the word new, this land, which is America, as a land of legend and romance. And it is here, students, that we need to locate the Enlightenment period, the Enlightenment 1714 onwards, with Newtonian physics and Lockean philosophy. It brought in a new way of thinking about God, nature, humanity, right? And there was a whole lot of celebration of rationality, of practical conduct, also of materialism. And as I said, I mentioned Creveker. You must, Creveker is, I think, part of your background readings. So Creveker needs to be read, his letters of the American farmer, that how there was this celebration of democracy in America. Right. Now, very interesting, all this while, one context was being totally ignored. And this is the slavery context. This is the black context. This is the context of regional differences. This was a context of differences between the North and the South. And students, I am here in the 18th century, right? In fact, we are into almost the 18th and the 19th century period. Now, the American Enlightenment clash. The ideals of American Enlightenment clash with with the institution of slavery, which was rampant in the South. So as I said, the map in front of you is very, very important, and I think I must move and bring in the next map. Now, students and friends, if you see, the portion in the green is, the south of North America, and the portion in light green, which is Tennessee, Arkansas, North Carolina, Virginia, also in portion in this creamish yellow, Missouri, Kentucky, Texas. So all this region was where slavery had hardened into the economy of these 13 states. And these 13 states, you know, uh, uh, decided to succeed. Succeed is break away from the North. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, talks about what was actually happening in the South. And there are several, of course, writers and critics and poets like Whittier, Lowell, Bryant, of course, Emerson, Longfellow, all of them, they were aware of this, though Emerson, we all know, is again, another term, another context, which is very important, is transcendentalism, right? Return to nature, but several of them also, and Crevacre also in his letters from the American Farmer, towards the end of his letters, does talk about this very uncomfortable treatment towards the slaves, the blacks. So Emerson, Longfellow, all of them kind of expressed their discomfort, with slavery. Right. Now, this is the time that Abraham Lincoln in 1861 took over as the president of America. And in his famous House Divided speech, he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And you must look up this House Divided speech. On it is available everywhere on the net. I think it would help because it also defines a lot of what happened in America for at least 100 years. Right. It was simmering, it was there from the 16th century, but from 1800s to 1900s, I think this speech is extremely important and relevant. A house divided itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave, half free. So, on February 8, 1861, the lower states, and I've just mentioned the lower states, they formed the Confederacy and declared themselves, they succeeded, and they actually wanted to declare themselves free and form a kind of a new country. So America was at the brink of a civil war, and this is very, very important. You see, the civil war contour, the civil war context is extremely important. Now that we are talking of the slave context, I think it is very important for me to just give you a bit of an idea of how it all started, right? So it was around the 1500s the that African slave trade began, bringing slaves to the Spanish Empire and the large Portuguese possession Brazil. Now, in 1619, for the first time, the first slave in Virginia, America, appeared. Now, Virginians were in dire straits. They needed labor. You know that, I mean, this was a fertile, rich land where there were cotton plantations, there were rice plantations, and then there were corn plantations, and so on and so forth. They needed labor to grow cotton for subsistence, also grow tobacco for marketing. They couldn't force the natives, right? Because the natives were in some ways, pretty strong, and because they knew the land, they would hide in forests and not kind of show themselves for days and months. And so they needed you know some human hands and some human force to support them in these ventures. Right. Now, so the colonists imported males and female slaves in large numbers. So this is how, in places like Baltimore, and Baltimore, which is, I don't know if one can see Baltimore here, it is near Washington, and I've been to Baltimore, right? And Baltimore, my God, you have to go to Baltimore to see, the port and some of the places. They still have those iron, poles and those big big chains where slaves were brought, and then they were tied and they were chained and they were hung, they were stripped naked and hung there. And then there was this kind of a heart, and there were markets, slave markets, where slaves were bought and sold. So here we are talking about this very very, as I said, tough context that America faced. The Civil War ensued, and most of you are familiar. You need to read the text Gone with the Wind, to understand what happened during the Civil War. You need to, of course, some of you might have just read and finished reading Toni Morrison's Beloved, though written in very much in the 20th century, late 20th century, but it is about, it is set in 1873, and it is about actually the trauma and the pain and the memory of the tyrann the suffering of the blacks during slavery and during the Civil War. Right. So this context, as I said, is very very important. uh, the end of the Civil War, of course, uh, meant abolition of slavery, and it meant kind of freedom for the blacks. Now, st- I think alongside this, what is very important for me is to also talk about another kind of thread, another kind of literature and context, which was flourishing, and this has been brought to you. And if you've read Whitman, and I think Whitman, the quintessential American poet, it is the American romanticism, the American, Renaissance and the romantic context, which is important. Uh, uh, Charles Brogden, Brown was the first American to devote himself to an exclusive literary career. Now, he portrayed the dark and the mysterious, and it was later on taken over by Edgar Allan Poe. We have, of course, Fenimore Cooper, we have Rip Van Winkle, all of them, writing about the optimism, of America, the stages of also introspection and self evaluation, the idea of liberty, the idea of nationalism. Of course, there was a whole lot of influence of Great Britain, on them. The relation of also man and nature. So we have Thoreau and others, who were kind of, all, part of this American romantic context. On the fiction side, you had, Melville, Fenimore Cooper, Hawthorne, Hemingway, Dreiser, Sister Dreiser, Sister Carrie, Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, several of them, writing about, as I said, this very, very optimistic, romantic concept. Let me, kind of move on and bring to you these important terms and contexts to remember. So when we talk of America, these are, I think, some of the very important, and they are up on the slide. American Dream, as I said, yes. Manifest Destiny, This was a treatise which, in many ways, listed down, what they wish to do in this new land. It was a very, very, as I said, a document which, in many way, provided them the roadmap. But it was, as I said, a very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant document, WASP document. So American dream, city upon a hill concept, American exceptionalism, that this was an exceptional, they were exceptional people, exceptional land. Today we have Donald Pease, we have Dorothy Matson, and so many others who are questioning this American exceptionalism. And of course, I'm going to come to that a little later, that post 9/11, what has happened to American exceptionalism? What are the reconfigurations? What are the revisitations to these concepts of the American dream and American exceptionalism? Declaration of Independence, yes. Enlightenment, transcendentalism, concepts like early settlers, Puritanism, Quakers, antebellum South, I've not spoken about. So, antebellum South, the time between the American Revolution to the Civil War, and postbellum South, that is after the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War, though there was this you know, slavery was abolished and the blacks were supposedly free, but there were no policies from the government side. There were no concrete plans, state plans for the settlement of the blacks. So the postbellum South, that is after the Civil War, saw this mass exodus of the blacks to the north, from the American South to the north, because north appeared to be far more liberated, more industrialized. They seemed to have, greater jobs in the north, and I'm talking about Chicago and New York and all this region, up north. Reconstruction in the American South, very important. The American South, of course, you have Toni Morrison's Beloved, all set in the American South. You have Langston Hughes writing about the American South. You have Alice Walker, you have Faulkner. In fact, another very important text is The Appeal by David Walker. I think Du Bois is a very important, theorist, that you need to kind of read to understand the slavery context and the American South context. Then realism, of course, transit. All of this is the result of the Newtonian physics and the John Lockean, philosophy of rationalism and reason and logic, and the rise of course, you have Dreiser and so many others, who were writing these kinds of texts. Transcendentalism, Enlightenment, Romanticism. And now I come to this next very important phase, which is a little more contemporary, and we are into the 20th century. So we are looking at 1920s. We're looking at the Great Depression. We are looking at the 1929 Great Economic Depression. We're also looking at a kind of a revival of the Afro American writing tradition, Afro American revisitation, and kind of a cultural retrieval of the Afro American, tradition. The blacks went through a kind of a evolution from negritude and from just being the Negro or the nigger, then blacks. You know, they today they prefer to be called Afro Americans. Harlem Renaissance is a kind of a flowering of black arts, black arts, black literature, black culture. You have several Claude McKay and several others like Langston Hughes, and who are part of the Harlem Renaissance. Alongside is also the Black is Beautiful movement and the Black Power movement. Uh, the 1920s and to 1940s is also called the Jazz Age, the Roaring Twenties, the Beat Generation, the Lost Generation. I'm going to just come to this a little later. Then I think this term is also very important. counterculture. So, what are we looking at in the 1960s, when it comes to America and the new mutants? Uh, if you read Allen Ginsberg's The Supermarket in California, you will just understand, who were these new mutants who rejected, what did they reject, what kind of tradition, what did they reject and what did they embrace, the dope culture, a kind of a re-looking at a new kind of a sexuality. So we are also looking at a new psychic culture. So Freud plays a very important role here, but a new culture, and also a psychoanalytical culture where, with a whole lot of thrust on sexuality. So the 1950s period in particular is a period of psychoanalysis and sexuality. That there's a revisitation to the native context, and finally we have a kind of a re- reconfigured transatlantic and global America. Right. Multiculturalism is also an important context that we need to kind of just understand. Yeah. So, if we look at 1900 to 1940, it is the new Negro movement. And as I mentioned, it is also alongside the Jazz Age in the Harlem Renaissance, a period of very fine new experimental drama. This is the period of, you know, Tennessee Williams. It is a period of production notes. It's the period where it's a new kind of drama, where there was a whole lot of thrust on techniques, whole lot of thrust on realism, a thrust on contemporary issues, and realism was seen. Right. You have, of course, the three master stalwarts of experimental drama: O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, and Arthur Miller. Right. So this is a very important, as I said, period, and important. And today we look at it from the post-colonial perspective. We look at this period as extremely important. Uh, when we talk of the early 1900s, who can ignore America's role in World War One and World War Two? And World War One and World War Two both actually resulted in a huge sense of disillusionment and loss of faith in self reliance. Self reliance was, of course, a context that Emerson and Thoreau, both of them, furthered in a big way. They practiced in a big way, they preached in a big way. Right. So there was this loss of faith in self reliant individual will and triumph. There was also an emphasis on bold experimentation in style and form over the traditional. And there was this interest in the inner workings of the human mind. So you have the stream of consciousness. Of course, you have in England you have Virginia Woolf practicing this, but here, even in a play like, say, the Glass Menagerie, you have the narrator Tom, and then you have, Tom as the narrator and Tom also the character. And we are into the consciousness of not just Tom but also the other characters, right? So a whole lot of thrust on inner workings, right? Just have a look at some of these famous authors, and this was, the 20th century perception is that this was extremely important. From 1950s to present, we have an American context, which is, and you might have just heard and read about this, America as the big brother. You know, you all know what after the Second World War, the Cold War ensued, and Cold War gave rise to two two power blocks. One was America and the other was USSR. And two major, you know, political contexts. One was capitalism practiced in America, and the other was, communism, as I said, which was linked with the USSR. And the 1960s actually also saw, and this is not listed here on this slide, but I just wish to mention a very important context, and the context of McCarthyism, the context of anti-communist, kind of trend, right? John McCarthy was a senator, and he, you know, was, somebody who really practiced anti-communist sentiments and feelings. It was as, you know uh, mm, as easy for the state to, capture and put behind bars. And I'm going to just kind of link it up quickly with the post 9/11, sentiment in America, where anybody with a crocheted, cap was, or with the name Khan, was kind of, you know kind of uh, picked up or was in the line of suspicion. So similarly, one had to only utter the word USSR or utter the word, so, that, that so and so is a communist, and the person would be put behind bars. So, that was the kind of Manichaean ideology, and I call it a Manichaean ideology, that was practiced and furthered by John McCarthy, right? So, America was, that uh, had become that country that was interfering in other countries' affairs in a big, big way. So you had the Korean War, you had the Vietnam War, and it's a whole lot of literature around the Vietnam War, and you have Levertov writing, and I don't want to again, as I said, get into the details of all this. You have the Afghan War, you have the interference in Iraq. So, there was this influenced by studies of media, language, and information technology. Uh, and, you have writers like Alice Walker, Wallace Stevens, E. Cummings, Maya Angelou, Anne Sexton, James Baldwin, Amitan, and several others who were questioning this. You have Adrian Rich, who reacted, and she returned. She was made the poet laureate, but she returned her, kind of honor in protest to American policies of, So this is a very important context that we need to understand. Of the last this is the last 70, 80 years, America, right? How much time do I have, Swati? So this is like almost an hour. So I'm going to quickly now,
You can take
uh,
now another 10 minutes or so.
10 minutes. Right, right, right. So let me now look at the conclusion. And the conclusion is, as I said, in fact, the last very important context in this context is of a new global order. It is America post 2001 9/11 attack on the trade towers and the Pentagon. Most of the earlier American contours and contexts have been recontextualized. America post 9/11, America is not the same anymore. The myth of American exceptionalism with WASP, when I say WASP, it is the white Anglo Saxon Protestant community and supremacy, has been in many ways busted. The American dream and the understanding of the American dream the dream of immense possibilities. I think it needs to be kind of re-understood and rewritten. Re is a prefix that has been, that is today added to American studies, figuring, evaluating, rewriting, right? Uh, there's also a kind of uh, I think, revisitation and revisiting of the entire concept of multiculturalism. America being a salad bowl, and America being this and that, and a land of, every people, with people coming from all places, and kind of becoming American. So there's no longer, the whole notion of identity is being, kind of questioned. You have critics like Leslie Fiedler, the Jewish intellectual, who has rewritten, the American literary history. He has questioned, the way in which, Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, or Herman Melville's Moby Dick, or Leather Stocking Dales, how, what kind of a narrative they were building. They were building a story of a kind of an assimilation with the native population, with the black population. In most of these works, in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Leather Stocking Tales and Melville's Moby Dick, there is this this black character. In You have in Huckleberry Finn, you have Nigger Jim, there you have Queequeg, you have Chingachgook. And so there is this entire story of some kind of a need for assimilation, which is only being read today, right? The entire Chicano, Mexican, Spanish context, of today, it needs to be foregrounded, it needs to be studied. America, I think, has the fifth largest Spanish speaking people. So, that is another, the Chicano and the Mexican, that is another context which requires probably a full length study, right? But that context also needs to be understood. The 20th century rhetoric of American exceptionalism, as I said, has to be redefined. And one can look up Donald Pease for this, and Dorothy Matson. Both of them have revisited. They talk of a new American exceptionalism now. There is, as I said, a rise of identity politics. And today, one talks of these different kind of silos, and different as I said, pockets of cultural pockets. African Americans, Jewish Americans, Native Americans, South Asian diaspora, you know the whole lot there. Gay and lesbian studies and movements, they need to be. And of course, a whole lot of other population, that is, the Chinese Americans, and so on and so forth. uh, I think it would be very interesting for me to come back full circle from where I began. I began, as I said, with the native context, which is actually the earliest context that we need to understand when we are looking at America. There is a revisitation to this context in today, and this is with which I would like to leave you. uh, you know if you look at Sherman Alexie, he's still living. He's a Native American poet of the Spokane Indian Reservation at Welpinit, Washington. Now his poetry is the most direct admission of what happens when his right to exist and his nation is decimated by a population of white settlers. There is a certain kind of irreverence. The word irreverence is very important. Greets us the moment we read Sherman Alexie, his tryst with his environment, the reservation that he grew up in America. His language is extremely hasty and sharp and uncouth. His images, as I said, are extremely uncaring, aggressive, and violent. Now let us look at, and just picked up this very, very short poem, by Sherman Alexie. And a lot, we don't need to really analyze the poem. A lot will be clear by just kind of reading this poem. Christopher Columbus, where have you been? Christopher Columbus, you are the most successful real estate agent who ever lived. Sold acres and acres of myth, a house built on stills. Beneath the burden of 15,000 years, my tribe celebrated this country's. Beneath the burden of 15,000 years. My tribe celebrated this country's 200th birthday by refusing to speak English. You see, all natives had their own languages, right? But and English was thrust on them by refusing to speak English. And we'll honor the 500th anniversary of your invasion, Columbus, by driving blindfolded cross country, naming the first tree we destroy America. So, this is a poem, Postcards to Columbus, from his collection Old Shirts and New Skirts. But if you look at the sentiment, it's a sentiment of pain, it's a sentiment of trauma, it's a sentiment of anger. It is absolute angst against against the colonizers, against the people who usurped their land. I wish, friends, that I had time to read out so much for all of you, including Jeev Seethal's, simple philosophy, and a whole lot of, other writings. I will still, because I think it is going to help several of you, because it is a new addition to this wonderful paper. This is the poet Joy Harjo, who's still living, who is a poet, who's a writer, who's an academic, a musician. She's a Native American activist from the Muskogee Creek nation, and her poems feature her own native Indian symbolism, imagery, history, and ideas are set within a universal context. And her poetry, it's so beautiful. And she has her own band. She sings. So it's a total breakdown of very, very, as I said, solid structures. There's a fluidity now in genres. She who is made the poet who is today the poet laureate of America, and she's a prolific writer. She's published so many anthologies. She's brought out so many, kind of albums. Joy Harjo is today a force to reckon with. She is such a prolific, as I said, artist. Um, if you allow, and if all of you are interested, would you like to hear Joy Harjo? Kind of, and this is, her, when she was awarded, this when she was made, rather, the 23rd Poet Laureate consultant in the poetry at the Library of Congress. There is this recording available, and I just thought that I will present to you a glimpse of this recording. And I'm going to end with this. Uh, Let me see if I can. No, I don't think I have it here. I cannot read one of her poems, but she is going to read her poem. So I think that is going to be a wonderful treat for all of us. So this could be a 2 to 3 minute clip. Is it all right, Swati, if we play this?
Yes, ma'am, of course. We would
Yeah,
love
yeah,
to hear her.
yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Oh, oh, no. Yeah. Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am. The
Yeah.
link is
Yes,
This
available.
ma'am.
is when she is
So
being
much
presented by the Library of
poetry,
Congress.
but the country and the world will gain even more from her appointment. She will continue to help all of us see the world anew and understand our past, connect us to who we are and where we are, and show us, hopefully, how we can move forward together. So please join me in welcoming the 23rd Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, Joy Harjo.
This room is all my family, you could tell. You know, this is the power of poetry. It's brought all of us here. I'm going to start out, and thank you, Mado, for Chubb, Sawika, and Chief, and Carla, and this. It's amazing because that's how it is. Poetry doesn't just emerge; it emerges from the soul of a community, from a community's history, mythological structures, the heart of the people, and it all goes back to the land because we are the earth. And so we're here tonight to celebrate poetry. And I'm going to start out with a land acknowledgement. Please bear with me with my system here. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we are gathered together this evening, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here. And also remember all those tribal nation representatives who came here and continue to arrive here in this city to seek justice. I'm joined here with my band. I've got Robert Muller here. Howard Cloud on bass. Larry Mitchell on guitar. I'll introduce them more fully in a little bit. I was back there making up bios for them. Fictionalized bios. Anyway, we're really honored to be here to celebrate poetry. And we're going to start out, it's going to be chronological. And one of the earliest poems actually was Remember. Because poetry has been one of my biggest teachers, and it's taught me. It teaches me how to listen. I was the least likely person to be a poet. I was going to be a painter like my grandmother Naomi Harjo and my aunt Lois Harjo, and because I could paint and I didn't have to speak. But one night poetry came to me and said, "You're coming with me. You need to learn how to listen." And yes, we know it's going to be a hard road, especially for us who are teaching you. And I took it on, and it's been my biggest teacher, because when you go into the place of poetry as a writer or a reader of poetry, you go into that place beyond time. You go into the place beyond words. And you find things there. You can find you find yourself, you find ancestors, you find out that those stones nearby can speak, and the trees have their own language. Now the scientists are coming out with all kinds of books about this, but this is part of our old knowledge. This is called Remember. It's for those ancestors here. Remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon, know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father, he is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Listen to them. Talk to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember that you are all people and all people are you. Remember that you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember language that comes from this. Remember the dance that language is, that life is.
So, friends,
Okay,
this
I
was
need to turn
Joy
my mic on.
Harjo.
Where's my mic?
I think.
I also wanted to say that every poem has poetry ancestors. And of course, I think of that poem, there's always Walt Whitman hanging out there.
I think I'm going to stop
He's
here
always
now.
there.
Any questions?
And I think of
Thank
some of our
you.
old
Thank you,
songs
Swati. You can hear me?
that always remind us to
Yes,
remember.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. It was such an insightful session and obviously very comprehensive and well encapsulated. So many things were there, but it had been
Horses.
well framed. Any questions and comments are welcome.
And the ancestors here, there's a lot of them. I think of my, I'm
Ma'am,
the
I think
seventh
the video is
generation
still
from
playing
Manali.
on. We can.
Yeah, that's what I'm just switching it on. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for a wonderful.
I just would like to say, Prem, it was a wonderful session.
nobody but for you would have captured so many things within this brief time, within a time of 60 minutes, an hour or so. You made the whole American history, and it was shown to us in such a way that I don't think students would ever forget it. Beautiful, very well put. Thank you, Prem.
Thank you so much. You all can hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Geeta. Coming from you, it means a lot.
Yeah.
Hi,
Thank.
ma'am. I hope
Hello, hello. Hi,
Nidhi.
Nidhi. Hi, hi. How
Thank
are
you so much
you?
for the wonderful session. Thank you so much
Yeah.
once again. And it was a brilliant session. I'm sorry I joined about half an hour late, but it was basically it tied up so many things together. We worked on the American literature book, and I'm looking forward to working on the second edition to looking into the poetry and short story section also with you. And
Fine, fine. Looking forward. Looking forward.
yeah,
If anyone has any questions, we can take that up. You can write your comment or query in the chat box, or you can even ask it yourself.
I have just one question. Firstly, thank you. It was lovely going back to American literature for me after a long time. 4 of my MPhil papers were on American literature, so it's been something that I've always had a great interest in. I was just wondering because whatever work I've done on American literature, somehow I've never looked at native literature at all. So, I mean, we are aware that their literary history is oral, etc. But now, are there any voices which are coming up, that have made an impact upon mainstream literature? And if so, I'm sure you'll
Yeah,
know who they are. So, could you please share that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. There are so many of them now. May I know your name? You are?
I'm Anuradha.
No, sorry, I'm sorry,
Yes.
because I can't see
Sorry,
you. Yeah.
I should just
No,
turn on
no,
my
not at all.
camera for a
Yeah, yeah,
bit.
not at all, not at all. Yeah, no, yeah, there are so many of these writers today who are, writing, and we begin with Scott Momaday. We have Silko, Leslie Marmon Silko, and you have Jeanette Armstrong, you have Morning Dove. Several writers all over the world. Barbara Johnson is an Aboriginal writer from she writes in Australia. There are a whole lot of First Nations writers, Lee Maracle, Joy Harjo herself, Sherman Alexie. Dude, there are anthologies now of Native American literature. If you read the works of Professor Krishna Sen, she's from Jadhav. I think she's from Kolkata. I don't know if she's from Jadhav, but she's from Kolkata. She's a renowned scholar. She's retired, Professor Krishna Sen, but you read her articles and you'll find a whole lot of them on the net also. So there is a renewed interest, and this all happened around the 1950s, 60s, and thanks to actually uh, if I can say, the post-colonial theories, the post-colonial gaze, the post-colonial relooking at, reconfiguration of cultures of the world. You see, where you could read a side, and I'm sure you're all familiar with a whole lot of
Yes, of course. Yes.
post-colonial theories. So actually, it happened all because of that we also looked at contexts that were invisibilized, and it happened all over the world. It happened in India too. If you look at India, again, we have India being so culturally diverse. Today we are looking at a whole lot of marginalized traditions, and marginalized literatures and cultures, and the tribal happens to be one of them, right? And again, thanks to this relooking, we are also looking at oral as a very important valid resource for study, and it's a very legitimate site for consideration when it comes to literature and culture. You have Ganesh Devi's work, you have Mahashweta Devi, though not a tribal herself, but writing so much about the tribal and the tribal women. You have so many writers, from the tribal world itself, who have been writing. We know of, the Adi tribe. You know the out. You have so many. You have Timsulao, who's herself, from the northeast, writing. You have Mamang Day. You have the Gaddi. So many writers from the Gaddi tribe. I can just continue on. But the fact of the case is that when it comes to native, I think it'd be very interesting if you could read up Silko, you could read up Scott Momaday, you could read up Jeanette Armstrong. Her, her novel is called Slash.
Yes.
Slash. So read up Jeanette
Yes,
Armstrong.
she's the only one I'm familiar with that I've
You're
read.
familiar
But
with
it's
her.
very interesting how things like sides Orientalism, or the whole post-colonial thing, the Empire Writes Back, a lot of these, and maybe the whole ideology that we use to talk about African literature, Native African literature, and of course Indian literature. If we use all that to interpret Native American literature, is something that I've just not thought about. But yes, when you bring it to mind, it makes so much sense. We can use the same theoretical framework,
And it would be so interesting. This particular, the YouTube the link that I shared, and I showed just a bit of it. If you go through this, it's almost a 1 hour long, kind of recording. My God, Joy Harjo, the way she tells us of, veneration to Mother Earth, to ancestors, to land, to people, to nature, that it really leads us to questioning ourselves, questioning our materialistic self, that what are we doing, today. After all, we all are products of the earth and the land, and of she says poetry has ancestors, and she pays a homage to Walt Whitman, to Audre Lorde, and so many others. So it's a different experience, listening to, particularly, a poet as prolific. Actually, she's a scholar, she's an artist, she's a poet, she's an activist, she's a painter. Listening to Joy Harjo, no wonder. And one is so happy that she is today the poet laureate of America. It's such an acknowledgement. It is something like Maya Angelou singing in the, I think she sang at the time of Obama's presidential, election and presidential ceremony. So when you have the margins acknowledged, I think it is a moment of celebration. It is a moment of celebration. Right.
Thank you so much. Definitely brings
Yeah,
to mind Whitman, Thoreau, Fenimore Cooper, that we are all familiar with. So
absolutely.
it's really good that these modern, postmodern writers, Native Americans, are now talking about things which were just, I suppose, just budding. What we saw in that during that time in the 19th century. So they seem to have flowered completely now.
Yeah, absolutely. That is why I thought of closing from where I began. I came full circle. I said, let me, one began with the native context because that is the original context. And I thought it'll be very interesting to close with the poet, the 23rd poet laureate of America. And that is Joy Harjo. And I need to kind of, I'm sure you must be aware of, but Joy Harjo is also part of a curriculum. So, our students are going to read Joy Harjo, or some of them might have just read Joy Harjo. So, it's so very important for them to be familiar with, you know, these supposedly newer contexts.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Since we do not have any questions, we can move towards the closer of the
I have
program.
a small question.
Okay,
I
good.
muted myself.
Okay.
Ma'am, the question is the link that you sent, is it still available on Harjo?
Absolutely, yes. I'm going
We can
to
access that?
forward it to Swati, and she can post it to the group. Or
Okay, or
I'll
you can
send it to
forward it
you.
to me
You can,
directly.
yeah, I'll send it to you. Yeah, yes.
And if you have anything on Langston Hughes also.
Yeah. I wish I could present Langston Hughes recordings too, and
Oh, okay, the
particularly,
recordings. Right.
recordings, and also his poem,
Right.
uh, The
To hear
Negro
that.
Speaks of Rivers and the American South.
Right.
Two beautiful poems. Yeah. So much, the blacks have given so much to America,
Exactly.
from the
Yeah. Yeah.
blues and the jazz. So much of rhythm they've given to America,
Harlem Renaissance
so
also.
much of music they've given, black art, so much of music they've given to America.
Any more comments? I
Actually,
think
just I would like to add something to what Prem said. It's only what's going on in my mind. It's not adding even actually. Prem was talking about the pain of the Aboriginal, the native Red Americans. Actually, whenever we travel that side, people call them Indians only. So initially, for any person who is going for the first time, when they mention Indians, they will always confuse the term with the Indians of from India. But when Americans talk about Indians, it is normally, usually, it is the red Indians and the natives. And when I traveled to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, I saw one statue of this red Indian, the Native American red Indian. And see, they almost look like our own tribal statues, which we can usually come across in Nagaland and people places like that. And I felt very sorry to see the Native American statue there. What value have they given to the Native Americans? They have segregated them, marked separate places. They live in pieces of land, kind of enclosed pieces of land, and they are marginalized. And we colonized people, we have secured our own kind of freedom. We live very happily in our own native place, native country here. But the Native Americans, the Red Indians, they are marginalized. They are even, I think they live like slaves in their own land. I always feel very sad for them, Prem. Whenever I go to USA, whenever I come across any that segregated piece of land, it gives me a lot of pain.
Anybody who visits America, you must go to the Native Museum. I don't
Yeah,
know Geeta, if you've been there. It's in near Washington. And it is such a
yeah,
sad story. In fact, Sherman Alexie has a poem, Evolution, on this. That how a museum has been built now of our products, our things, our culture. And it's a huge satire on, in fact, Chief Seathel's A Simple Philosophy is also a kind of a satire, because he says, how can you buy the land? How can you buy the sky? How can you buy Mother Earth? And he
yeah,
says it politely written a letter to me.
yeah,
That, he's Chief Seathel, by the way, people who don't know, is a Red Indian chief. And a letter has been written to him by the President Franklin Roosevelt to, that, the president wants to take his land, buy his land.
yeah,
Now
yeah,
the chief says, how can I sell my Mother Earth? How can I sell the sky? How can I sell nature? And he goes on and on. It's such a beautiful letter. So that
yeah,
is very true. It's a very, very sorry state of affairs.
yeah,
And they are an extremely angst lot, extremely and it comes out in their literature, it comes out in their poetry in a big,
yeah.
big. Joy Harjo's poems are full of this pain and trauma.
True, true, true. Yeah, yeah. We can only wish them good luck. What
Absolutely,
else to do? Yeah,
absolutely.
okay. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the concise yet comprehensive overview of America within quotes. America as the concept, America as the country, America as that, the entire capsule of ideals that it, uh, presented or it wanted to be. And uh, on behalf of the Department of English, College of Vocational Studies, I again extend my gratitude to you, ma'am, that you took out time for us. And I'm very thankful to the convener of this program, our teacher in charge, Sanjeev Kakkar sir. Though he's not here because he's busy, we have a meeting in college today. And obviously, I'm thankful to the patron of this program and all the other programs that we are having this year, and we have in our college, our principal, Professor Indrajit Dagar, for being the support system, for being the source of encouragement for us all. And I'm thankful to our senior teachers, Geeta ma'am, Anu ma'am, for being there to encourage me, and my peers from different colleges, and of course our dear students from this college, and of course the students who have joined from different colleges as well. I'm sure after this lecture, you got an idea of what this paper entails. So thank you so much, Gitali and Gitanjali, for being the co-host, so that I could sit, peacefully and do my job. And thank you everyone for making this program a success. The recording of this program would be uploaded. I have a small YouTube channel, Litrophania. So it would be uploaded there, and I would share the link as well with the various groups that I am into. So we shall meet again as the journey towards knowledge continues. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for making this program a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati.
Thank you, Swati. Thank
Thank
you.
you,
I'll
Prem.
share the link. I'll share the link.
Yes. Thank you.
The channel's name is Litrophania. If you find out on YouTube, it's there. So even later on, if you go to our previous program that we had, that is also uploaded there, and any future programs would also be there. So you can check that out.
Swati, could you? Yes, somebody asked. Could you just spell it? Literal.
Okay. Litrophania. I'll just
Put it on the chat. Thank you so much. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks,
ma'am. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm sorry for any shortcomings on my part, or we are also just beginning with all this, so we are also learners. So I think I may be excused for any shortcoming in the program or on my
I enjoyed consolidating ideas. It was difficult, but I did that. Thank you. Thank you.
Great session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.